Messerschmitt Bf-110, a heavy fighter. In the mid-1930s, there was great interest in the concept of the heavy fighter, namely a fighter aircraft with at least two engines, which would have improved survivability in combat as well as carry heavier weapons and have a longer range. This new concept was particularly appealing in Nazi Germany, where the head of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring, took a personal interest. A German Ministry of Aviation request called for a twin-engine three-seat, all-metal monoplane armed with cannon as well as a bomb bay. Of the original 7 companies, only the Bavarian Aircraft Works, the future Messerschmitt, Focke-Wulf, and Henschel responded to the request. Messerschmitt omitted the internal bomb load requirement from the ministry directive to increase the armament element of the specification. Subscribe to our channel and get notification when we release new episodes. The Bf-110 was far superior to its rivals in providing the speed, range, and firepower to meet its role requirements. By the end of 1935, the Bf-110 had evolved into an all-metal, low-wing, cantilever monoplane of semi-monocoque design, featuring twin vertical stabilizers and powered by 2 DB600A engines. Even with the temperamental DB600 engines, the Ministry of Aviation found that the Bf-110, while not as maneuverable as desired, was rather faster than its original request specified, as well as faster than the then-current frontline fighter, the Bf-109B1. Thus, the order for 4 pre-production units was placed. The first of these were delivered in January 1937. During this testing, both the Focke-Wulf FW-187 and Henschel HS-124 competitors were rejected, and the Bf-110 was ordered into full production. The Zerstörer destroyer entered service with the Luftwaffe in 1937. Thanks in part to propaganda encouraged by Göring, these aircraft became regarded as the elite of the German Air Force. Schoolboys fantasized about becoming not single-engine fighter pilots, but members of a Zerstörer crew. On paper, the Bf-110 certainly looked formidable. It had a range of 1,500 miles compared to just 400 miles for the Bf-109. It was almost as fast as most single-engine fighters, and it was armed with up to 4 20mm cannons plus 4 7.92mm machine guns in its nose, giving it more firepower than any contemporary fighter. Nevertheless, the production of the Bf-110 was put on a low priority in 1941 in expectation of its replacement by the Me-210. During this time, 2 versions of the Bf-110 were developed, the E and F models. The E was designed as a fighter bomber, the Zerstörer Jabo. First combat. During the invasions of Poland, Norway, and Denmark, the Zerstörer performed well. According to the Luftwaffe order of battle, a total of 102 Bf-110s were used in the Polish campaign with a loss of about 10 aircraft. Polish pilots were unfamiliar with the type, often identifying them as bombers. Future ace Wolfgang Felck scored his first kills over Poland, as did future Night Fighter ace Helmut Lent. Escorting German bomber formations on attacks against Warsaw, Felck's unit claimed 30 kills on the first day. Polish fighter units reported a 17% loss rate that day. This rose to 7% in 5 days. On November 23, 1939, the new fighter claimed its first Allied victim when Bf-110s engaged and shot down a Marine Saulnier MS-406 of the French Air Force over Verdun. Just 3 weeks later, on December 18, 1939, the Bf-110 participated in the first German victory over British arms in World War II. Royal Air Force Bomber Command had sent 22 Vickers Wellington bombers to attack the German naval base at Wilhelmshaven. Despite help from Bf-109 units, it was the Bf-110 that excelled in the bomber-destroyer role. By the end of the fighting, the Germans had claimed 38 RAF bombers. Actual losses were 11 Wellingtons, with 6 more damaged to varying degree. Some sources claim a 12th Wellington was destroyed. The raid caused the RAF to consider abandoning daylight bombing of Germany in favor of night actions. The Bf-110 Zerstorwaffe destroyer force saw considerable action during the invasion of Denmark and Norway. On April 9, 1940, the Bf-110s destroyed 25 Danish military aircraft through ground strafing. During this campaign, Victor Molders, brother of the famous Werner Molders, took the official surrender of the town of Aalborg after landing at the local airfield. Dressed in flying gear, he was given a lift into the town center by a milkman. In Norway, the Bf-110s helped secure the Oslo-Fornebu airport, escorting Junkers Ju-52 transports loaded with paratroops. The Germans were engaged by several Gloucester Gladiators and machine guns manned by troops on the ground. In the ensuing battle, both sides lost 2 aircraft. After experiencing fighting in Norway, efforts were made to extend the combat range of the Bf-110C, which resulted in the Bf-110D long-range Zerstor. The enormous Dackelbach ventral tank, owing to cold weather and limited knowledge of fuel vapors, sometimes exploded, leading to unexplained losses during the North Sea patrols. As a result, the air crews came to dislike this version. On the Western Front, the Bf-110 performed well when it encountered mostly British bombers. On June 13, 1940, a squadron of Skua dive bombers was intercepted trying to reach and bomb the German battleship Scharnhorst. A squadron of Bf-109s and another of Bf-110s shot down 8 Skuas in as many minutes, with the Bf-110s claiming 4 kills. Among the victors was Herbert Schaub, who survived the war as one of the most successful Bf-110 pilots. During the Phoney War, a number of French aircraft were shot down by Bf-110s. From May 11 through the 13th, 1940, most of the 82 aerial claims over Belgium were made by the Bf-110. The Bf-110 force also encountered the Swiss Air Force during this period, as several German raids violated Swiss airspace. About 5 Bf-110s were shot down by Swiss Bf-109s. The campaign in the West that followed in 1940 demonstrated that the Bf-110 was vulnerable in hostile skies. It performed well against the Belgian, Dutch, and French air forces, suffering relatively light losses. However, it was quickly outclassed by increasing numbers of British Hurricanes and Spitfires, especially when forced into a tactical role it was never meant for, close-range bomber escort. There, it was unable to take advantage of its superior altitude performance and speed, and was forced to wait for the enemy to attack rather than roaming about finding and destroying enemy aircraft, as the original Zerstor concept had intended. Then came the Battle of Britain, and suddenly all fears were proved. The Bf-110's weight, almost 4 tons, meant it lacked maneuverability and acceleration compared to British Spitfire and Hurricane fighters. It was badly mauled during the battle. By September 1940, when the daylight air offensive against Britain was finally called off, over 300 Bf-110s had been lost in combat. It had proven successful in the Yabo role, particularly in anti-shipping strikes, but for the air superiority role, it was painfully inadequate. One of the Bf-110 pilots killed during the battle was Hermann Göring's nephew, Hans Joachim Göring. The Bf-110 was then transferred to the Balkans and North Africa, where in the absence of serious air opposition, it was able to still raise hell through the first half of 1941. After that, the Bf-110 was generally relegated to a ground attack role, though it did enjoy some success as a fighter during the early stages of the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. Night Fighter. In 1940, the RAF switched from daylight bombing raids against Nazi targets to night bombing. Suddenly, Germany needed a night fighter. The Dornier Do-17Z and Junkers Ju-88C2 were both considered, but the aircraft chosen for the first Night Fighter Squadron was the Bf-110. While a lack of maneuverability might have limited its use as a day fighter, the Bf-110 made an ideal night fighter. The power of its twin engines allowed it to lift greater loads than a single-engine fighter. Furthermore, its heavy armament was capable of shooting down any bomber, and it was vice-free to fly, an important consideration for safe night operations. Bf-110Cs had been committed to the night intercept role, with the aircrew dependent on Mark I eyeball for targeting. However, they only worked well on moonlit nights. The problem led to use of Bf-110D fighters fitted with an infrared sensor in the nose, but its range was too limited. Liechtenstein Airborne Intercept Radar proved a better solution. The Bf-110F4 was one of the first successful production night fighters, with a third crewman as a radio operator and a ventral tray with twin Mark 108 short-barreled 30mm cannons to provide more killing power. Aircraft were vectored towards a target by ground controllers using Würzburg and Freya radar. These radars were able to give the target's altitude and speed, and were accurate enough to guide the fighter to within 500 yards of a bomber, by which time the Bf-110's Liechtenstein radar would be able to lock on. From April to June 1942, the Night Fighter Force destroyed 230 British bombers, and by September, it had shot down a total of 1,000 bombers. Most of these victories were scored by Bf-110s. Ju-88s were also being used in the night fighter role, but these were often used in long-range intruder operations over England, and most of the defense of the Reich fell to the Messerschmitt. The fighter would maneuver below a bomber, often being able to see the aircraft silhouetted against the night sky above. The bomber, however, had no visibility below and would be unable to see the Bf-110 as it slid into position. The fighter would generally target engines or fuel tanks if possible, since firing directly into the bomb bay produced such a huge explosion that there was a risk of the attacker being damaged. This system became known as Schräge Musik, strange music or slanted music. It proved so devastatingly effective against British bombers in the winter of 1943 and 44 that some British raids produced unsupportable levels of casualties. The final main variant of the Bf-110, the G model, began to arrive in 1943, and it included the Bf-110 G4, a dedicated night fighter version that featured updated DB605B engines and provision for an improved Liechtenstein radar unit. By 1943, British bombers were fitted with a system codenamed Monica, a detector designed to warn the bomber that an aircraft behind was searching for them using radar. The system worked, but the Luftwaffe responded with the Rosendal-Helby system, a passive receiver that homed in on the emissions from Monica. A number of Bf-110 G4s were fitted with this system in early 1945, and this enabled them to find their prey easily in the night sky. With improved performance and armament, as well as devices allowing them to find RAF bombers in total darkness, the last version of the Bf-110 became a lethal night fighter. For example, Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, one of the Luftwaffe's leading night fighter aces, was flying a Bf-110 G4 equipped with Schräge Musik cannon and Liechtenstein radar when he attacked a stream of British Lancaster bombers on the night of February 21, 1945. In the space of less than 20 minutes, Schnaufer shot down no less than 7 of the bombers. As a day fighter, the Bf-110 was largely a disappointment. However, as a night fighter, a role for which it had never been designed, the Bf-110 proved to be devastatingly effective. About 6,170 of all Bf-110 versions were made through the war period, but only 2 are known to still exist. Messerschmitt Bf-110G, work number 730301, is displayed at the Royal Air Force Museum's London site at Hendon, North London, and Messerschmitt Bf-110F2, work number 5052, is displayed at the Deutsches Technikmuseum in Berlin. If you like these types of videos, subscribe to our channel and get notification when we release new episodes. For more interesting military history content, check out our video library.